Good evening and welcome to Kenya News Update today. I'm your host, and we're diving deep into a political storm that's reigniting painful memories and exposing deep fractures within Kenya's ruling coalition. The target, Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua. The accuser, Kapsay MP Oscar Sudi. The issue, the 2007 Kiambaa church tragedy. This isn't just about the past. It's a raw, present-day battle for political survival and moral authority. Over the next 12 minutes, we'll unpack the explosive allegations, examine the historical context, and analyze what this means for President William Ruto's government as it navigates economic pressures and internal dissent. We'll present multiple perspectives, from Sudi's fiery accusations to Gachagua's defense and the voices of survivors caught in the middle. Let's begin. Our story starts with a social media post that detonated like a political grenade. Kapsay MP Oscar Sudi, a key ally of President Ruto, took to his platforms and directly challenged his own deputy president. He didn't mince words. Sudi demanded that Rigathi Gachagua explain his whereabouts and actions during the horrific events at the Kiambaa African Inland Church in Eldo, read on New Year's Day, 2008. For those who need a refresher, that was the day a mob surrounded the church where hundreds of Kikuyus had sought refuge from post-election violence. The church was set ablaze. Official reports state that 35 people, mostly women and children, were burned alive. It remains one of the most searing symbols of the 2007-2008 post-election chaos. Sudi's implication is clear and devastating. He is questioning whether Gachagua, then a businessman and aspiring politician in the Rift Valley, was complicit or turned a blind eye. The trigger phrase was stark. Tell us where you were when Kiambaa Church was burning. This isn't ordinary political mudslinging. This is an attempt to redefine a colleague's entire moral and political identity. To understand the weight of this accusation, we must revisit that dark period. The 2007 presidential election pitted incumbent Mwai Kibaki against Raila Odinga. When the Electoral Commission declared Kibaki the winner, protests erupted, quickly morphing into ethnic violence. The Rift Valley became an epicenter. Long-standing grievances over land and political marginalization exploded. Kikuyus, perceived as Kibaki's base, were targeted. The Kiambaa church attack wasn't an isolated incident, but it was among the most brutal. A commission of inquiry later documented the tragedy, but many feel true justice was never served. Now, Oscar Sudi is wielding this history as a weapon in a contemporary power struggle. Why now? Political analysts point to several factors. First, there's the persistent tension between Gachagua and a faction of MPs from the Rift Valley, Sudi among them, who feel the deputy president is consolidating power for his Mount Kenya base at their expense. Second, with President Ruto's administration facing severe economic headwinds, internal factions are jockeying for position and influence, testing loyalties. Sudi's attack is a direct challenge to Gachagua's credibility and his right to speak as a unifying national figure. Let's hear the defense. Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua's office issued a swift and categorical denial. They labeled Sudi's remarks as reckless, inflammatory, and a desperate attempt to rewrite history for cheap political gain. The statement emphasized Gachagua's role as a peacemaker during that period, claiming he worked behind the scenes to shelter victims and calm tensions in his Nairi backyard. His allies have gone further, turning the spotlight back on Sudi. They ask, where was Oscar Sudi in 2007? What was his role? They accuse him of projecting his own history onto others. This back and forth creates a hall of mirrors where each side accuses the other of historical amnesia or worse. It's a dangerous game, one that survivors and peace advocates warn could reopen wounds that have only partially healed. We spoke to a community elder from Eldoret who asked not to be named. He told us, "These politicians are playing with fire. They are using our graves as a podium. We lost families. We don't need their accusations. We need their help to heal and build." But beyond the personal feud, this controversy touches on a massive, unresolved national issue, the legacy of post-election violence and the quest for justice. The international criminal court cases collapsed. Local judicial mechanisms have moved slowly. Many perpetrators from all sides were never held accountable. This creates a vacuum where political actors can selectively deploy history as a cudgel. Sudi's move is a calculated risk. He is betting that by associating Gachagua with that dark chapter, he can weaken the DP's standing, particularly among the very communities that were victimized. It's a stark reminder that in Kenyan politics, the past is never truly past. It's a tool, waiting to be sharpened and used in the battles of the present. Now, let's shift to the broader context of the Ruto administration. President Ruto came to power with a bold promise to uplift the hustlers, to empower the youth, and to transform the economy from the bottom up. A cornerstone of this promise was youth empowerment through funds and programs. But how is that promise holding up under scrutiny? Every Kenyan administration takes power with a familiar pledge: empower the youth, uplift women, unlock entrepreneurship. And every administration exits leaving behind a trail of funds, frameworks, and pilot programs whose impact is difficult to trace. Billions of shillings are announced with great fanfare. Let's look at some numbers. Since the advent of devolution, national and county governments have launched over 24 dedicated youth and women's funds. The cumulative allocation? Experts estimate it exceeds 150 shillings billion. That's 150 billion shillings. Yet youth unemployment remains staggeringly high, officially near 20%, but realistically much higher among those under 35. Where did the money go? A recent investigative report titled Billions Spent, Little to Show dug into this very question. It found a pattern: politicized selection committees, bureaucratic bottlenecks, and a lack of sustained business support, leading to high failure rates for funded enterprises. The report highlighted that of the 50 shillings billion allocated to the National Uwezo Fund, Women Enterprise Fund, and Youth Enterprise Development Fund between 2013 and 2022, recovery rates for loans were abysmal, often below 30%. But more critically, the tangible creation of sustainable jobs was minimal. The funds became, in many cases, another form of political patronage rather than engines of economic transformation. President Ruto's new administration has launched its own suite of programs, like the Hustler Fund and Affordable Housing Levy. The promise is to learn from past mistakes. But the skepticism is deep-seated. When politicians are busy fighting over historical tragedies, it raises a question: is there enough focus on delivering the economic future they promised? This brings us to a global parallel that underscores the stakes. Recent Oxfam report laid bare the brazen political influence of the rich, as the wealth of the world's billionaires ballooned to a staggering $18.3 trillion. That's trillion with a T. Meanwhile, global efforts against poverty have stalled. The report argues that governments, including in many developing nations, are effectively choosing policies that benefit oligarchies while brutally repressing protests over austerity and lack of jobs. In Kenya, we see this tension play out daily. The government is implementing new taxes and austerity measures to manage a crippling debt burden, now exceeding 11 shillings trillion. Public discontent is growing. The political elite, however, often appears insulated. A feud like the one between Sudi and Gachagua can seem like a distant drama to a young graduate struggling to find work or a family battling the high cost of living. Feeds a narrative of a political class obsessed with its internal wars while the economic foundations for ordinary citizens remain shaky. Let's visualize a key aspect of this youth empowerment challenge. Consider the typical journey of a government youth fund. First, there's the announcement and the budget allocation. Then comes the application window, which often sees massive interest. For instance, a recent county youth fund launch received over 8,000 applications, but the funnel narrows dramatically. Out of those 8,000 hopeful applicants, only about 1,500 received any form of training or capacity building. And from that group, a mere 320 were actually approved for funding. That's an approval rate of just 4% from the original pool. And the average disbursement? Often less than 100,000 shillings per beneficiary, an amount many say is too little to start a viable business in today's economy. This mismatch between promise, process, and outcome is at the heart of public frustration. So where does this leave the Sudi-Gachagua feud? It's a symptom of a deeper malaise. When a government is under economic pressure, internal cohesion frays. Factions look for leverage. For Oscar Sudi, attacking Gachagua on the sensitive issue of Kiambaa is a high-reward, high-risk strategy. The reward: potentially elevating his own stature as a fearless defender of the Rift Valley's interests and a voice for true justice. The risk? He could alienate moderate voters, further polarize the nation, and provoke a severe backlash from the powerful Mount Kenya region, which remains a critical pillar of President Ruto's support. For Gachagua, the risk is a permanent stain on his reputation. Even if the allegations are false, the mere association with that tragedy in the public discourse can be damaging. He must now spend political capital not on promoting government agenda, but on defending his personal history. President William Ruto now faces a delicate balancing act. He cannot afford a full-blown war between his deputy and an influential MP from his own Rift Valley backyard. Yet, he also cannot be seen to be silencing discussion on historical injustices. His response so far has been muted, likely hoping the storm will pass. But insiders suggest behind-the-scenes mediation is underway. The president's priority must be maintaining coalition stability to push through his ambitious economic agenda. However, this incident reveals a fault line that won't be easily plastered over. It speaks to unresolved ethnic tensions, contested historical narratives, and the volatile mix of money, power, and memory in Kenyan politics. In our final analysis, the story of Oscar Sudi versus Rigathi Gachagua is more than a political spat. It is a window into Kenya's ongoing struggle with its past and its challenging present. It shows how historical trauma can be weaponized in the fight for future power. It highlights the gap between grand promises of youth empowerment and the gritty reality of implementation. And it underscores the global context of rising inequality, where political battles sometimes overshadow the urgent needs of the populace. The victims of Kiambaa Church deserve more than to be used as pawns in a political game. The youth of Kenya deserve more than recycled promises and ineffective funds. The question for the Ruto administration is whether it can move beyond these internal fires and deliver the tangible, inclusive economic growth that can truly unite the nation. The coming weeks will show if this feud escalates or is contained, and what cost it will exact on the government's unity and purpose. For Kenya News Update today, this has been a deep dive into the politics of memory and power. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today.